Welcome to the meeting. We're talking about community councils. Let's go around the room. Identify yourself, Julia.
Julia Tucker, Assembly Council.
John Cecil, Community Development.
Kathy Gleason, Jernigan Community Council.
Earl Akers.
Mark Butler, FCC, and a member of North Star Community Council.
Are you representing the FCC here, or do we have to go through that whole debate? Sorry. Go ahead, Carol.
Why are you?
I'm listening. Yes, I was told to be here by my boss and to listen and participate and make any comments, but that, towards the process.
Darrell Hess, Municipal Ombudsman.
Tim Steve.
Amy DeBoski.
Dick Trady. I'm sorry, Mark. It was just a funny federation meeting.
I'm not gonna.
Anyway, let's go through this. Poor Kathy gets going. I have to stop
Thank
the
you.
tape. Anyway, we've got the ordinance down here that we're going to submit to the Assembly on the 22nd of October. Darrell, you want to go through any changes? I can't see the need to go through this whole thing again, line by line. We've done that multiple times. Well, all the changes that have been recommended and agreed by the body they put into this?
Well, perhaps Julia could
Julia?
take us through the changes.
Well, I want to do it, I think we should do it in two parts.
Okay.
We have, in these pages, the changes that we took over from last meeting are incorporated and they're put in bold here. And I'll run through those. And then Darrell and I have had some additional suggestions from the municipal clerk. And those have not made it into this section, and they were not, for the most part, not substantive, but we want to tell you what those are, so that you can, if a section is kept intact but rearranged, so that you'll know where to find it and not get concerned that it was deleted or omitted. So, focusing on the language changes, the first one is at the bottom of page 2, under 2.40030. Well, actually, let me back up. Kathy Gleason, on page 2 at the top, Kathy had a comment, and others helped me understand this, that we might have been a little too repetitive under 240.010, that they understood that I had put back the charter language, which I think, and the assembly members here think is important to do. But that my transition from what's in the charter to what our code and the purpose of 240 had too many words in it. And so I took out some words, and so you'll see it says in this chapter 240, the Assembly establishes basic community council procedures to implement self-determination and maximize community involvement through independent community councils. And so that way we could kind of get out what everybody was talking about here and put it in there. So that's the first change. Then the second change is at the bottom of that same page, 240.030. Again, there was kind of a wording in transition. So the title of that section will be definitions and community council membership. And so we'll add membership there to forecast what's going on. And then the first line, which won't be section A, but it'll be a line there, it'll say these words and terms shall have meaning for purposes of this chapter and community council membership. So that, again, it preps the readers. So then when we say business owner, it just doesn't pop out, without the context of membership. So that was my bridge.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's good.
And so then in that, on the same page, on line 40, you remember that one of our participants whose name escaped me, it might be Al.
Al Tomei.
It said, there are professional entities that don't need an Alaska business license. They have some other kind of Alaska license, so don't be so restrictive. And so now we've changed that to say professional or commercial entity currently licensed by the state of Alaska. So that way we have some impetus of the state, signifying that it's a business, and you don't have to decide if they're really a business or not. On page 3, on line 10 and 11, we just massaged the language a little bit there so that, and took out some of the other new language that was too wordy and just said who attend a community council meeting in their district and sign the member attendance roster. So it's a member attendance roster, and we're just gonna go with that. And then a person may qualify, we have may qualify in more than one community council, but I figured we better say and hold membership in more, not just qualify, because what do you do if you qualify in more than one? Other places you were excluded, so, okay. On page 4, under section 240.035, A3, what we did here is, there was a suggestion by John Weddleton to take the business about charging dues and not charging dues out of this section and move it to subsection B. So take it out of the A listing and move it to B. So we did that. And then we went back, we had a lot of discussion last time on number 4, which I couldn't see what to do with it, but I kept replaying the tape in my head about it. And so number 4, it said, is an opinion of the assembly representative of the residents in the district? And people said, well, what does that mean? And afterwards, Daryl and I talked about it, and it seemed like representative of the residents, we've already said it's the membership, is residents and there's other people. So maybe there is something we can figure out how to make that more meaningful in context. So I did that through changes in 3 and 4. So one of the criteria on recognition is a commitment on the group coming forward to say that they're represented, committed to affording citizens an opportunity. Again, we have this theme that's right out of the charter for maximum community involvement, self-determination through community council membership, and then does not engage in practices contrary to the provisions of this chapter. That seems pretty reasonable. Then number 4 has, in the opinion of the assembly, the capability to represent the community council district membership. And then that, because, that's a practical approach rather than a legalistic approach that says, are they doing this and this and this? It's a, more common sense. So that's what I came up with for those things. On page 5, under B, we massaged that a little bit to reflect better what should be happening here. So the community council shall timely adopt bylaw provisions in response to code changes. Bylaw amendments shall be filed with the office of the municipal clerk. And so that took out that business about, the default if you didn't file them. The immediate default. And then down at number 3, under B, that's when we added back in, I had, as Kathy pointed out, executive board someplace, executive committee someplace, and so we fixed that to be executive board members to address community council business, including the accommodation of community council responsibilities under the code. And that accommodation of the new responsibilities are those ones where the community council sometimes has the community meeting, things like that. So I just thought it was a good pointer.
Could I interject before we go to the next page, Chair? On B, line 11, where first to timely adopt, and again, is there any kind of, is that when you've got the 120 days kicked in later?
Right, so this says you have to do it timely, yeah, so this, the general rule is you gotta do it timely, that'll be in code, and then in this ordinance, it'll tell you when that is timely, and that timely says 120 plus the 90.
And that's whether it's just an amendment or this whole revision that every council's gonna have to do because of the changes in code.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
this is just applicable to any change.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Okay, so, in number 4, at the bottom of that page, we just cleared up the executive board and the officers. There's no substantive change, just we made it uniform, what we were talking about, that it was executive boards, and we don't use executive boards, executive committees, and executive teams interchangeably, we just kept it to one term. On page 6, beginning on line 5, we fixed the electronic recording business to put minutes first, and then upon request, the record shall be made available within a reasonable time determined by the community council. So there's no substantive change, it was just a reordering of the words there. Number 9, notice to the municipal clerk of a change in the designated contact for direct notice to the community council or a change in legal status of the community council. You have a question?
Yeah, Mark Butler. Right now, I'm not aware that anyone notifies the municipal clerk of who the designated contact is. They just simply update the list with me, and I publish the master list, which is downloaded from our website, has been downloaded 10,000 times, so it's the most highly used thing. Then we also have the president's list, which is reflective of who's on that master list. But I'm not aware that anyone is, and I certainly didn't, I'm not aware that anyone has ever notified the municipal clerk that, gee, I'm now president of this council, and here's my contact
Right, and that's
information. They
why-
just send it to me, and I upload it and change that document, hit the post button.
Right, so there's a couple of things about that. One is, my understanding when you post it is it's not HMTL, it's like a PDF, so
Yes.
somebody can't click and go there. There are obligations that the municipal.
On the president's list it is, but not on the master list,
Yeah.
I believe.
So,
Yes.
the municipal clerk has obligations to notify the community councils themselves on these liquor licenses. That's in
Right.
code for the community, for the clerk. So aside from what you do, the municipal clerk wants to have that list in there, and that's why it's in the code now, in this draft, is for the very reason that you state, nobody's doing it now. And that needs to happen.
Okay, so right now what happens is, to my knowledge, is that when notifications of liquor licenses come up, they send it to me and I forward it to all the presidents.
Right,
Boom,
but
boom.
and our understanding is that.
By municipal code, the clerk is required to send it directly to the council.
Well, two things. I think that there's nothing preventing a notice to go out to you and that going. I think that that's a perfectly good thing to have happen. It may not be the only way that the clerk's office is going to be notifying the community councils. And so the clerk's office, because of the responsibilities, needs to have these things forwarded directly to the clerk's office. I'm sorry, you have more correction.
Well, I asked this question too, because the code says that the council be notified, it doesn't say the federation be notified. So Anna Novak, the deputy clerk for licensing, actually forwarded me the email with the list of license renewals for this year that went to all the council presidents, and it also went to the federation. It's kind of a, let's cover all of our bases here. So they do both, because they want to involve the federation, but they also, because code says they send it to the councils, they send it to the community council presidents whose addresses are on record, and I think they use the federation website to get those addresses.
Well, Dale, the charter speaks to community council.
Right.
So I want the community councils to have to keep our clerk's office notified, to do the contact point for that community council is. Because we've got we've got Anna up there working on it now, and I want her to have direct contact with the community councils. So we don't miss by some half chance a liquor license. I want to make sure that we notify them and then we get the federation to notify them too. Because we had one community council that got a liquor license because they didn't have it on the record, this contact point. It's in my community council, so I'm a little sensitive about it.
Were you the president?
No, I wasn't. Anything else on this issue? Okay, go ahead, Joe.
Okay, so then in number 12, on that same page, in line 26, it's just meeting and member attendance rosters. shall be used only for council business. We took out, other stuff that was cluttering that.
And sorry, Chair, I've got something on 10, if we want to.
Okay, go ahead, go back to 10.
Excuse me. Well, I don't know why I've become a stickler on this. It's probably because it's the one about following Robert's Rules of Order.
Uh-huh.
And the word is, in all instances, matters, and proceedings not covered by the bylaws, which then I'd have to see what the bylaws say. But I don't use Robert's Rules of Order during our board meetings. We're sitting around having lunch. It's pretty informal. And also with committee meetings, if the committee meetings that I happen to either be co-chairing or just be a part of, using that really formal structure isn't really conducive to a lot of a committee level interaction and dialogue. So, but this doesn't seem to give wiggle room. It says anything related to council. So
You know,
is the.
if I'm not mistaken, I mean, I may be wrong in this, so I think it's worth looking up, but some of the organizations that I belong to have the same thing in our bylaws, and my understanding of it is that there are provisions within Robert's Rules that allow you to have, by practice, your informal meetings, and by practice that you are not wed to the letter. So we have much more open discussions, and we've developed our own culture of rules in the smaller group meetings, and I don't think that that's contrary to Robert's rules.
Okay, well, see, I've not
And
read
so-
Roberts from cover to cover, so.
Right, and so
Yeah.
I think that this is, and were you to want to do it very formally, when you're first pulling your group together, whatever that is, then you can say, for purposes of our committee meetings, this committee meeting, for purposes of the board meeting, I'm entertaining a motion that from here on until we revisit this, we're gonna suspend Robert's Rules. All ayes, then you got it, anyway.
Okay.
And so
I guess I'll have
there
to
is the
look that up.
flexibility, you can always suspend Robert's Rules, and my suggestion would be, if you want to dot the i's and cross the t's, is just do that in those committee meetings, not meeting by meeting, just do it as a standing motion.
Yeah.
Until you come back, and then you're within it, because there has to be a fallback.
Okay. If that's in there, I'll take your word for it and won't be concerned about that anymore.
Okay.
The holders will liable for that statement. When I was on the school board, though,
I'm sorry.
when I was on the school board, we generally acted a lot less formal than Robert's Rules. But if push comes to shove and you need to be formal, or you need to be restricted, you revert back, or at least I did. And we never got too much trouble for it.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Julia?
Okay, so eligibility to vote, that's where we moved for the suggestions to put, to make some changes here, and then also on number 15, we added, on the next page, we added that new section that we had under A, this is where we put it, does not charge dues, in the business about the in-kind.
Mark Butler, if I may.
Yes, sir.
So back on 13A on page 6 of the 15,
Mhm.
line 31 and so forth. So election of officers and executive board members, councils may require attendance at 1, but no more than 2 council meetings in the last 12 months. So some councils have rules that say that people, in order to be able to vote, just members to vote, qualified members to vote, had to have been at least one meeting. In fact, North Star does, Tim. So this would preclude that. That means anyone who shows up gets to vote, period. Whether they've never participated or they've come once or more in the last 12 months. Is that what this document saying?
Go ahead.
Yes.
Okay.
Reading through the
That was
34, 35 sets of bylaws, the majority of councils now, you show up, if you meet the requirements to be a member, you sign in, you vote, other than for elections. There's only a few councils, Fairview, North Star, maybe 3 or 4, 5, that have previous attendance requirements to vote in general memberships and meetings. And when we looked at this, we thought about the charter and its charge for maximum citizen participation. And it seems if you have a controversial issue and you get 100 people that are qualified to be members and show up, you know, if they're eligible to be a member, they sign in, they vote, and that's how you engage them with your council. We've heard stories of people who are eligible to be a member of a council. They live in an area, they show up, they sign in, and they're not allowed to vote on this issue, so a lot of them don't come back. And I think that's why you see some councils that have pretty robust attendance, because they encourage that maximum citizen participation.
The reason we have this on officers, because I've seen some community councils where people that never show up for one meeting where officers are elected, we never see them again. They take over community council by showing up that one day. Had they had the requirement to attend a couple of community councils before they can run for officer, they wouldn't do that. So we just want to make sure, because I've had some bars try to do that, take over community council. Mine particularly. Some place called the Fly By Night Lounge tried to take over ours. Since we had in the bylaws they had to attend another meeting that year, they could run somebody for officer.
So the informal term amongst the community council people is stuffing a meeting,
Yes.
where a whole bunch of people show up. And so let me go back to 13A again to clarify an eligibility to vote. So to be an officer or executive board member, you may have, you may require previous attendance, or are we saying to vote for officers and executive board members?
To vote for officers. Eligibility to be an officer is determined by the councils themselves, as it says earlier in the.
Okay.
The councils determine the qualifications to be an officer, the process for electing an officer, their terms of service, their removal and their replacement. All of that has always been left up to the councils and is left up to the council in this.
Take reflect that Mr. Tremaine joined us. Hello, sir.
So that's a change. I can think of Spanard also has, you have to have joined to be a member before you can vote, at least one meeting. So I think that's a noticeable change that I hope the councils will understand when this document comes out, so they can make comment on that during the process.
This does not preclude stuffing the meeting, using your term.
Yeah, come join us.
On an issue, though.
Yes. And yes.
Yeah, if I may, Chair, I mean, that's,
Yes,
traditionally, that has really just never been an issue for Turnigan, where,
Some councils have.
where people came and, you know, that normally never come and you'll never see them again, except that they want to make sure a vote goes their way. But unfortunately, I've had it happen 2 or 3 times this year, because of all the stuff we've dealt with, and it is very frustrating. It's very frustrating, but I see the balance of that versus you want to be as open and inclusive to anybody eligible to participate as possible. It's a pretty difficult thing for a council to deal with when it happens, but you know, I don't know that there's any easy answer to that.
So I personally, not through my employment, agree with that policy. But I was just bringing that up because I know of particular councils that do not have those rules and would have to change under this proposed plan.
Julia?
And I think Darrell has coupled that one, you know, with the dues, requirement for dues too, and that's the other one that needs to be highlighted, that that there cannot be, if this.
Dues for membership.
If these provisions pass in this form by the assembly, then community councils are precluded from having a couple of gates that some councils, not all, have had in place that restrict participation by eligible members. And one of them is charging dues and making it mandatory that you pay dues before you vote, or tie dues paying to voting eligibility. And the other one is to tie prior attendance to voting eligibility, except on the election of officers, for the reasons that Dick went over. Okay, so we touched on page 7 at the top, that's where we put the charging dues. We took it out of A and we put it in under B as B15. There's no changes from last meeting on the maps or things like that, so we go to page 10 of 15. And comments that we received last time, I believe in writing from John Weddleton, again, showed us the opportunity to highlight under A, which has to do with the comprehensive plan, an opportunity to say what I have here, the adopted elements as described in municipal code and listed in this table. So we have a great table now in code, and that code will go into effect January 1, but it's posted online and there's not a problem with referencing it ahead of time, so we don't have to amend this again if we get it passed and approved before then. And then that spurred me to go on and do a review of community council functions under present code, and that's what you see in the expansion under E.
And Chair, if I may, before we get to that, I just have a comment on A1 and 2. I wasn't sure, but it seemed more logical to move that additional language at the end of 2 to just go ahead and include it in A, so it would read in regard to the Anchorage Comprehensive
Oh, that's a
Plan
great
and its
idea.
adoption.
That's a great
because
idea.
it applies
That's
to
a
both
great
1
idea.
and 2.
Yeah. That's a great idea, because we're defining the comprehensive plan.
Yeah.
So we'll say the comprehensive plan and its adopted elements as blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And then 1 and 2 would be, that's a great catch.
Thank you, Kathy.
Okay, so E has a number of things that don't come up very often, like national security road closures, but it seems an appropriate place to list things that the community council has as part of their function and recognize them in one place under code, even though they're scattered throughout. So that continues over onto page 11. And so F, I didn't want to put gasoline on the fire, right? So I did, thank you for prepping me with the background on what went in to the discussions in Title 21. And as I've disclosed to Dick and to Daryl, this is not word for word. It uses all the same words, but it reorders them a little bit out of Title 21. So in the Community Council's code, it would say participate in the community meeting process, because that's what it's called under Title 21, under Municipal Code 2103-020C, when notice from the developer is timely. And so that to me covered the situation where notice from the developer might not be timely to meet the community council's schedule, and it sort of avoided some other things. So that was my way of sort of keeping maximum flexibility at the community council level. Kathy, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly caught that it's vague enough that it covers my concern of, although if a developer comes to me in a timely manner, say the week after we just met, so he's giving me 3 weeks notice before we meet again, that I want something on your agenda. But I already know because of deadlines and master plans and things, that my next month's meeting is already booked and I just can't fit him in, whether it's timely or he or she is timely or not. That's what my concern was with regard to the wording in 1021, that it didn't allow for that kind of scenario, which unfortunately during my presidency has been, our agendas have been packed. So I don't know how that would.
The assembly just has another meeting the next day.
Well, you know, we're all volunteer, Tim.
Yeah.
And so that, I mean, that's not really practical. I think what my input in during the Title 21 was that, you know, maybe a special meeting, like a community meeting, not necessarily a council meeting per se. But, or if there's just too much, if it's, say, controversial, and you know it's gonna take an hour or two just to cover that agenda item, and yet you've only got a 2-hour meeting, although mine goes to 3 sometimes, it's just not practical to fit
And that's
something that you
accommodated.
just have a separate meeting just for that item.
And that's accommodated in Title 21, that's what it says.
Well,
That they go
no.
first to, well, I think that it would behoove you to interpret it that way. That my reading of the Title 21 provision is that it makes it incumbent on developers to go for the community council
First, try to go to
first.
community council meeting, then if
First,
not,
and then if they can't do that, then they have an obligation to set up some other, another mechanism.
But
for
the
community
wording
input.
is that if the developer didn't notify the council in a timely manner, and it didn't allow for, even if the developer did notify the council in a timely manner, but it's just not practical to put that item that may take up the entire 2 hours to discuss on the next month's agenda.
Right, and so we can't fix Title 21 in here,
No,
but
I
we
know.
can give you a code section that looks like this one. And so then you can have, sometimes the practice under the code, sometimes it's impossible in code drafting to hit every particular manifestation of practice. And so what happens is that when a code is passed, you develop a course of dealing. And so I anticipate that the course of dealing is gonna be that whether the code says it's timely to meet the community council's schedule, or timely to meet the developer's schedule, or timely to meet some 3-week notice schedule, that the course of dealing is gonna be that when the community council can fit it in, they're gonna fit it in because they want to. And when it's too big, or they can't, then the developer is gonna have to, under Title 21, make that other accommodation and have an alternate meeting. And so I think it doesn't behoove us to stick to an interpretation of Title 21 that may be too restrictive for what the practice is gonna be, and so I left it more open here.
thank you, we got about 20 minutes left, so.
Okay, so in 240-060A, we just added a lead-in line because I looked at this language, and there's nothing in here that we wouldn't want the mayor to do anymore. It's just that those things are gonna be in addition to the functions that are already listed under 240-050 in this code about when things have to happen, including Title 21. So that way we don't have to redo any of this. It's still there, but it supplements the other responsibilities. And the same thing for B. This is my way of, my suggestion to make sure that the as of the effective date of the Title 21 changes, which is January 1, 2014, that the notice requirements will meet or exceed the requirements that are set out in 21, so we don't have to have any kind of a heads-up amendment.
And Chair, I had something
Yes,
on
ma'am.
page 12C. I know that I brought this up at our last meeting with regard to, not only councils and property owners receiving notice of something going on, like a rezone, but then also notice of when an action was taken. And it looks like that covers everything, but the problem is that 30 days. On line 10, that they shall issue an informative response within 30 days. And including the response shall include the reason for the municipal decision. When you only have 15 days, once the decision is made to appeal a decision, that 30-day time frame doesn't work. So I don't know how we get around that. On any other thing where there isn't a shorter deadline for appeals or other action, response by a citizen or council, that 30 days is perfectly reasonable. But it doesn't work for appeals.
Does that appeal to FCC rulings or?
Well, the only place I'm completely familiar with, although it could be in other places in the code, is for cell towers. Because I now am familiar with the code wording in that particular section. And in that particular section, it's one, that the applicant has to notify you the decision that the municipality made, which they've never done. And then it says you have 15 days to appeal, once that decision is made. So that's the problem.
Julia, could we put in there, within 30 days or as required by code, by federal law or something, for certain, is there a way to word it where if there's a shorter time frame required? So it can't be, if the code requires that it be 15 days, we can't say 30 days here.
Well, it's not, you have 15 days to notify the decision. You have 15 days, once the decision is made,
To
to
appeal
submit an
the decision.
appeal. Which, if you interpret that as, well, then I can submit it on day 14 and I'll be good, then you only give 1 day for somebody to respond and put together an appeal, which is completely
But
unrealistic.
I think the problem here is trying to insert Title 21 requirements that are stricter than what's in Title 21.
Well,
into
it's just,
2.40.
responsibilities of municipality to councils. To me, that needs to be covered because right now that's not happening. And that's why I wanted to put it included in this document. If we're gonna list responsibilities, then I think that one in particular that's being violated right now, needs
If you look into
to be
it, Julia.
addressed.
I think the problem to mandate a 15-day response for any municipal,
No.
municipal departments get, if you're gonna actually put a timeline, municipal departments get hundreds of inquiries a year from community councils.
Yeah, and like I said, under any other circumstance, I think 30 days is good and reasonable, but it's just those where code says you have a limited amount to file an appeal, then 30 days doesn't work.
Julie, if you'll take a look into that.
Okay, I'm thinking that, first I was thinking that it would be, response within the applicable, appellate period, but as you pointed out, that if they're gonna send it on day 14 of the appeal period, that doesn't really work. So I'm thinking that it would go something like this, and I'll tinker with it a bit more as Dick has asked, that shall issue an informative response timely for the community council to meet code requirements and then I'll somehow do a sweep for the 30 days in there, because what I'm hearing is that there are times when the community council is trying to meet its code requirements and the response from the department isn't timely enough for you to do that.
Well, or we haven't even gotten a response. But one thing I
Is
do want
it a
to,
response or is it a notice?
well, see, it's a two-step process. Receive notice of say, a rezone. But, or let's just keep it to what I know, a notice that there's a cell tower proposed. And both, property owners within 500 feet and the community council shall receive notice of that. And we always have, we do. But also in the code, in that section of the code, it requires the applicant, not the municipality actually, but the applicant to notify, and it doesn't say community councils, but it does say property owners, or excuse me, I'm sorry. It says whoever received the notice of it, which does include councils and property owners, to receive notice of the decision that the municipality made. And then in the next section, or following section, it says property owners, not councils, but property owners have 15 days to file an appeal. Councils can't file an appeal.
Okay.
But councils have to get the notice of the decision just along with property owners, so that property owners contact council and say, how do we do this? Can you help us? You know, and may go, I don't know, I didn't receive notice of anything. I don't know what you're talking about. So it's kind of it's a multi-step process.
Okay, so I'm thinking, and I think it's just good to spend some time on here because I won't have another chance to do this. I'm thinking that you got two things going here, and so this is about response to community councils, and I think that we sort of need another section here about notice of action.
Well, and that's, I thought in the last draft, there was kind of a separate section where
Okay.
then I pointed that out, but I don't remember.
Okay, I'll check that, and then I think that up here, within 30 days, we leave that, and then we'll put a section, we'll put another line someplace in C about that 30 days, that the 30 days doesn't relieve the obligation to provide timely notice of actions under this new section that I'm thinking. And then you sort of have a bridge there, so
Oh.
that you can have a default.
Yeah, it was actually in section A on the previous page where I felt like it should be inserted. That because there's reference to the planning department shall send a copy of the same notice to the chair of the community councils whose boundaries land. Then that's where I thought, not only send out a notice that it's happening, but then you have to do the follow-up, send out a notice of the decision that's made. Otherwise, you don't know that a decision's been made, let alone a property only have 15 days to appeal that decision.
Jim,
Okay.
we've got 9 minutes left. Can we finish this up
Okay.
and then come back to that? Because
Yeah, that's
I'd like to finish this before we run out of time.
I think that you have to turn to the last page for the next changes. And these are the changes that we talked about last time, so that we wouldn't have a situation where the community councils were immediately out of compliance, and the default would go in only if the filing period and the extension weren't met. And so that concludes the changes. The ones that the clerk's office talked about were to include other designees sometimes when it says bylaws will be reviewed by the ombudsman or other assembly designee to give the assembly more flexibility. And the assembly will decide about that. What did Ernie say about an amendment that he had in mind? He had one amendment.
Ernie wants one that's, when the community councils pass a resolution, that it would send us the yays and nays on it. For example, like the tennis court issue that you had in Turnigan, that came and told us we had 25 that were in favor and 1 against it. And so that's what Ernie said he wanted on everything coming to us. We'd have the vote total on every issue coming from the council to us. So if you've got Rogers Park and the vote was 10 for and 20 against it, we'd know about it when it came to us. That's what Ernie was.
Or more importantly, that it was 3 for and 2 against. There were only 5 people there,
Yeah.
kind of thing.
So that's what Ernie wanted to
You
put
can
in
judge
there.
the significance.
Resolution's coming to the assembly.
And is he, in terms of going forward, does he want it reflected in the draft here, or?
He wants it
is
reflected in the draft.
Well,
Daryl's had a conversation with him,
Go
and so
ahead.
I wanna.
Yeah, we
Or does
talked-
he want to have it by floor amendment?
We talked about it, and I see both sides of the issue. And I think this group had that discussion early on, and we felt that that might diminish the influence of community councils. that currently, when Ernie and I talked about this, currently, the assembly members have the option of requesting, I know when I
They
was.
can request
When I was a
information.
council president, I was asked multiple times what the vote was. And Ernie decided not to move it forward.
He did, okay,
Yes.
that's later
Not
than I
to
heard.
move it forward at all, or not to move it forward in this draft?
Well, not to move it forward in this draft.
Okay.
I think it's
All right, so we may have more, one or more assembly members coming forward with
That's more
that as
updated
a floor
information.
amendment, and we're just giving you a
Yeah.
heads up
There might be a
about
floor
that.
amendment.
In there, and so if I'm requested to do a floor amendment, then you'll see it come
Yeah,
across
But don't make a change.
in draft, but we won't, my understanding from the committee is we're not making
Just
a
gave you a
change
bit,
in
I
this.
suppose.
Yeah, well, I think everybody's torn on that issue that I've talked to.
Not my wife.
And-
She doesn't want it in there.
From my perspective, it's the first question I always ask, how many people are at your meeting and vote? You know, because it's gonna, that information is helpful to me, like Tim said, if we have two people, well, you said five, but I'm thinking of one of my councils, if we have two people that show up at the council, you know.
Right, and I've always counseled the assembly that it's a totally reasonable question to ask. I think moving it from a question to ask to putting it in code on reporting sort of,
I think it should be standard
Yeah.
questions.
Yeah. yeah,
Then
standard
you
practice
have-
by the assembly, and instead of having it be as part of the reporting requirements, because it sort of flew against what we were trying to do in terms of self-empowering and self-determination and leaving it up to community councils on what they're gonna put in their bylaws. If the assembly gets,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Dick.
So, I think every assembly member has a moral obligation to go to their community council meetings. So they should see those
So they were
votes.
there?
There should be two assembly members seeing those votes.
Or more.
One
So-
community council should have 6 there, but.
So I will just rest on that one, on that issue, because I will tell you that there are a large number of assembly members that forego their moral obligation on a routine, if not consistent basis, certainly where I live. Having said that,
What part of town do you live in?
No.
having said that, this is the third meeting where we've had the bylaws stuff to talk about, and we have not yet talked about it. And this is a problem, because you're gonna be presenting bylaws, if I can, Mr. Chair,
Go
the
ahead, Dick.
introduction of this ordinance is later this month,
The 22nd,
and then when do you anticipate discussion?
sometime in November.
And do you anticipate it going to any other committees or?
No.
No, obviously, we would ask it to be a full cycle, so every community council can look at it. But you're gonna have community councils now looking at something that the public haven't had any chance at all to formally participate on. I've submitted comments that have been accepted, I'm sure others have as well, and I thank you for that, and I think it's greatly improved from the first draft. But it's a problem. And it smacks of a dark and sinister approach, even though I know that that's innocent. Nevertheless, it smacks of it. So, that was just a comment, sir.
Smack is.
And there is no time, Dick. Let me point out to you, there's no time constraint on this.
Well,
We've got budget cycle
I
coming in
think,
November.
I think it should go to the community councils for.
I want it to go to
It has
community
to.
council.
That's the one that people have been calling me at my job at the FCC and said, the chairs and officers and delegates, oh, okay, now what's really the poop on this? You know, and so I try to relay what's happened. Well, no, they're just busy and they have their own lives and other things. They're all volunteers, as we've said. But so now they're saying, okay, what was the changes from this document last time? So I've had a hard time communicating to that because, of course, since there are changes, it's usually happened, we've usually gotten this a couple days before the meeting, which is completely understandable. So my suggestion is that once there's a document that your committee likes, that, and as Dick, the former assemblyman, has said to me, it's just being introduced on the 22nd. Well, my suggestion is I would wait a cycle or two of community councils before you even introduce it. But if not, introduce, but allow the councils to
Hold
do
a
it.
public hearing a month later?
Perhaps, but one cycle of the community councils with this document, and if there's going to be a, you call it an AM, I believe, assembly memorandum that talks about kind of the major changes here, that go with, and the sample bylaws, that go to all community council members, not just officers and everybody. So everybody has a chance to see it. Then, after that's done, they can come and talk to their assembly members and members of the administration. And also, community council members and community council officers. They can vote on it as a council. And then they can go, understanding what's happened, to the public hearing that you hold. So rather than hold a public hearing, run it through the community councils, because it's about the community councils. And let's work that system once, is my suggestion.
Well, I told your federation that I'd be back to your next month's meeting.
Right.
And that's fine. There is no time limit for doing
Next
this,
week.
you guys. If we have to put it up for another month or two, we can put it off. The world's not gonna come to
Well, I
an end.
think what he's suggesting is whenever it's introduced, to make sure that when you set the public hearing, don't set the public hearing 2 weeks, don't follow the auto. And
Yeah.
we'll just request a public hearing
That's fine.
later
Like-
in the year. So it's helpful for us to have an official draft going around, because
Right.
then, and that's the introduced draft.
And also, if at all possible, rather than me writing what I think is said in here, Assembly Council or someone writing, these are major changes that we see that this document says. So they can go, okay, no dues, okay, that's on section so-and-so, or no whatever, no stuffing, or no,
I think that's a great idea.
so then that's clear, and allow each council then to have at least 1 month cycle.
We'll take-
And it's perfect for October, November, and till the middle of December.
We'll take care of it. We have a budget issue coming up that'll take most of our time.
Really?
Also, I suspect, we send not only hard copies to the council, but also electronic copies, so they can distribute electronically
Amy?
The only thing I have to say is, first of all, I just want to thank Julia and Daryl for all their hard work. I know it's been challenging, but I think, though I don't agree with everything in here, I think you've done a fine job. I just want to say that. But also, Daryl and I had this conversation, and I think it is helpful, once we solidify this draft, if we can get it up on the assembly webpage as soon as possible, that would be helpful. Because the challenge I've had, all but one council I have in my area actually meets. I brought the draft, the most recent draft I've had, to every single council and presented it and talked about it. So I know my councils have been well aware of this since the summer. And then this last month I've gone to all of them. So they're not gonna be surprised by it. But the challenge we have is, they're like, well, what's the most current language? I'm like, well, I know this has changed, this isn't here, so I'm trying to articulate it, and it's been challenging. But I think if we have it, as soon as it's done, even if it's before introduction, as soon as it's done, if we can put the draft on the assembly page.
I think we have been having, has the draft gone on the
Well,
clerk's page
that
per
was
the
the comment I
request?
was gonna make. Whenever there's a revised draft, whenever these meetings are held, they're noticed. The Federation is copied, the documents sent to the Federation, and to anybody who's come to meetings and signed up. And all of the revised draft, as it's revised, are posted on the Assembly webpage. So the draft we're looking at today is posted, it's been posted. So I will start clarifying that when I send emails to the Federation and to anybody else who's contacted me. And Amy, I've been contacted by Rick Sennett and other council presidents in your area asking
Well,
questions.
he's
So
never
thank you for letting
contacted me, but
he
I
actually
keep
contacted
emailing
me.
him, I just never get anything back.
But so
I-
we're trying to do, and just my experience with the Highway to Highway project, when I was the president of council in Fairview, we went door to door down the corridor handing out flyers. It was on the front page of the paper, and then we would still have people to say, nobody told me. So we will make every effort to reach out,
And
but we're still gonna get people to say, nobody told me, or I didn't know.
And I would just like to say, I would like to see the bylaws on the website too, because that would be helpful. And I apologize, Daryl, but I give everybody your name and number.
That's okay.
That's what you're supposed to.
It's in my emails, it's in my emails that I
Yeah,
send.
yeah.
But Chair, I want to go back with what Dick Tremaine said as far as the bylaws, and I know, I thought this was going to be a 2-hour
Well, I want a
meeting, so
meeting
I
in
thought.
2 weeks just on the bylaws. The only thing I wanna do is spend an hour in 2 weeks on the bylaws.
I'm
So
out.
I've got, three of us have a big meeting tonight, and we need time to go over our material. So that's the reason I'm cutting it short at an hour,
Okay.
because from tennis courts to taxis to something called 37, we have, and then there's the money coming down from the state. We have a busy night tonight.
And tomorrow night, brother.
Yeah, and the next night too.
So,
Darrell, what we can do is schedule a meeting in 2 weeks when Amy can be here.
I can-
Let's just do the bylaws.
I'll schedule the meeting, but I won't be here. I'm out of town the 19th through November
Okay,
2nd.
when you're back,
But
let's set the meeting after some
I think
bylaws.
you have to be here because somebody has to be scapegoat.
that's on record. The bylaws will have,
Didn't you write them?
once we have a draft, that's when the bylaws have to be finalized, because anytime there's changes in this document, then I have
Affects
to,
bylaws.
I've changed them 20 times. And so actually, Mr. Tremaine and I talked at the last meeting, we did some emails, so I think we're really close.
So let's
Just-
talk about, let's go visit introduction again, because if we're gonna make the introduction on the 22nd, that means these would go into the clerk's office on Friday. And I'm leaving town Thursday morning, and so that means they would really go in on Wednesday, that's tomorrow.
So just hold off introduction till the next cycle.
Does that work for
It is,
everybody?
no.
And that
They
gives
keep
us,
after it, I don't want to drag it out.
But there's no
Right.
wolf at the door, we have to worry about it. So just put in the next cycle, after
Okay.
the 22nd. So that would be the first meeting in November.
right, and so the introduction on that is gonna be,
End of the month.
well, not quite the end of the month.
Let's just look at the
And
calendar.
so we'll look at the calendar for that. And so, but it'll be 3 days after the meeting on the 22nd. And so that's,
So then I have to get the bylaws done, so I need to know what's gonna be introduced
Better hurry up.
before I leave on the 19th.
right.
You got
And so I
time.
think we know what's gonna be introduced. We've gone through
You can do it electronically.
this here.
So you
Yeah.
wouldn't be
Well, we
following
haven't
things.
talked about the bylaws, if they're gonna be part of the.
Well, but he's saying to finalize bylaws, what he's been waiting on is to make sure that he has the current
The draft.
of the
Yes.
draft, to
Sure,
make
well,
sure
of
that
course,
that's
so that they can
in there,
have-
because
yeah.
they have to combine, and then at some point, we'll make sure that what we put in there.
Is our next
From
draft-
there is wordsmithed in to make sure that it's, I haven't inserted anything, too legal, so,
Too legal. I love that.
well, you know, we want them to be easy to read, not loaded with a bunch of here and there, yeah, but
I thought we
there's some
had a
legal
guide to
conventions we
legalese.
can put in, that is good.
So,
So let's see what we can do about that, because, we have schedules that aren't exactly lined
well, the
up.
bylaws, like I said, I worked with Mr. Tremaine, I think there just needs, any tweaks that, anything changes in the draft need to go in. And what I can do then, I will send the bylaws out to the group for comments, if you can get them back
You do
that day or
Oh,
two.
okay. Yeah, we
And
can
that
do it
way,
that way.
so, because they can always change after introduction,
Yeah.
so.
Okay,
Is the next draft, the draft that we're gonna go forward with?
it's my intention.
So,
Okay?
Mark's gonna ask, so what about the clerk's comments? Because we touched on them, but we didn't discuss them.
Well, I was gonna ask that question, what does everybody think about a separate bylaw section? Julian, I thought it was, yeah, when we talked about it.
Thought it was what, I'm sorry?
That was great. It highlights the importance of the bylaws and separates it out. Currently, and it has been for years, recognition and bylaws, and that really should be recognition and then bylaws. And I think, and then moving those two final sections in the entire ordinance that actually refer to bylaws into the bylaw section, kind of make it easier for I think, for the councils to understand what their responsibilities are. It's just my
I
opinion.
agree. I think it's a good idea.
Julie and I were going, what do we think of that?
Yeah, so I mean, because it didn't have, there weren't any substantive changes, I think that it's sort of not unless, absent some red flags on substance that we missed, then it's just a question of organization of the code, and if it makes it easier for the people who are administering and the people who are passing the code, then I'm assuming it's gonna make it easier for the people who are on the other end of the code to read.
So just to clarify what you just said, I believe, I'm sorry I had to step out for a moment. one of those council presidents on the phone.
That sounded derogatory.
Your
One of
boss, huh?
those council-
I have many bosses, as you all do as well.
Go ahead, Laura.
So what she's proposing here, the clerk, is just reorganizing some of this, what.
In specific, she
Right.
proposed to reorganize the bylaw section.
Right,
The
okay,
section
so-
that is incorporated, as Daryl said, under recognition of bylaws.
Right.
And to give bylaws its own section.
Okay.
And to my knowledge, she made no substantive changes.
So just reorganizing
in the
what was already
language.
there.
Yes, and then
Great.
the only other additions that I saw that she made was in a couple of places where it says, the assembly may ask the ombudsman, she said, or me, a designee. It could be a designee, it might be me. It might be somebody else besides the ombudsman, so we'll put designee
Okay, okay, thank
in
you.
there, because that does give the assembly flexibility to designate,
Can we agree
either the
then we
clerk
go
or
with this
anybody
with the
else.
bylaws section in it?
The one comment that she did make
Okay,
was,
do it.
where it says that bylaws and notice of legal status registered under state law, if any, shall be filed at the office of the municipal clerk. And her comment was, I do not think these two sentences clarify the requirements here, and I don't think that the assembly or the clerk have a need to know the legal status of the community councils. I'm worried if we leave it in, it would suggest that the clerk has an obligation to check on these requirements, and we're talking about councils who are registered as nonprofits. So the current draft says that the councils will have to file any updates regarding their legal status. They will have to notify the clerk's office if they're incorporated, or their incorporation lapses, or they become unincorporated, so. And she disagrees with that.
Disagrees with the
with
notice.
that. She does not think that it should be the responsibility of the clerk's office to.
Right, and it's not the responsibility of the clerk's office, so I think that what the concern that she has is that the notice, it says notice, and it's not that they have to file their actual change, or that the clerk has to inspect that, but lots of times we come up with questions in dealing with community councils, and we need to know their legal status. Do they qualify? Can they take it in their own name? What is going on with them? And so I think as we move forward, we have questions from, Lauren's not here today, but Lauren had questions about whether community councils can qualify for direct state grants. And
It's a 401c3.
yeah, and so there's, I think to answer that question, it's helpful if that notice is filed with the clerk's office.
Does notice give us some legal responsibility should they do something count to their status as?
It doesn't give the clerk's
nonprofit or
office
whatever?
any legal
If we knew about it,
responsibility.
there's certainly no, I don't know. Sometimes if you know about something, you have some culpability in terms of actions taken for the, I don't know. If they say they're a 501c and we say, okay, 501c, and then they aren't, and they do something.
Right, so no, I don't think that, I think that it's important that the obligation for the councils is to represent what they are. And if they lie or they're wrong, that's not the clerk's problem, but what is the obligation is in the community councils, and it's not what their legal status is if they change legal status,
Yeah.
then submit it. Submit notice to the
If they
clerk.
forget to refile for something that comes up, then are they, never doesn't it?
The reason I asked about.
I just worry about that.
The reason I asked about it is, this is one more thing they will tell me that we have to do. This is one more on our list of obligations that we have to do with the city. And it's one more thing to forget or fail to do or something like that. But that's why I mentioned, I'm just writing down the things that they will be required to do that they aren't necessarily required at this time.
Yeah,
Correct.
and-
Amy?
Well, I just, I agree with Mark. It's kind of when we're all volunteers, and especially if someone new steps in as a board or a member or officer, and then, it's like, oh my gosh, what all are we supposed to be doing? I think what would be helpful, that won't be any decision on your part, but Dick and Mark, and, you know, to have FCC provide a cheat sheet, you know, a fairly concise, this is what you're obligated to do, as per code. These are the highlights. You gotta do this, and this in a bullet way.
Yes.
And make sure everybody has it, remind us on occasion, so that those kinds of problems won't occur, that we forget or we're not informed. And that's a great thing for FCC to help us with, so.
You know, community councils are a wonderful facet of our charter, because it's designed to take the government and move it down to basic level. And there's a lot of people that would love to get rid of community councils, period, because they're inconvenience. But we don't want to do that. What we want to try and do, yes, it's gonna make more work on community councils.
Do you
But it
think
gets the
that,
message down to the lowest level, get everybody involved in their own government.
do you think it would be a problem if the clerk's office doesn't want to have that notice to, have the notice go to the ombudsman?
I said the
Because-
ombudsman.
Because, I mean, sometimes it's questions that go to the
Sure, he
ombudsman
knows
as
more
part
than
of the
anybody.
support. Would that be a big burden on you to receive that notice?
No, but I think it's more what the councils think about that requirement than what I think about. I mean, what do you think, Dick?
Well, I mean, let us talk about it. I mean, I'm truly just a tad confused in this discussion, because if you're asking I'm a nobody, Rabbit Creek's just a group, and we have to tell you our bylaw changes and everything. And now you're saying if I'm incorporated, I don't have to tell you those bylaw changes? I work in the fishing industry. You tell me the rules, and then I can figure out how to do what I want to do. So you tell me that rule, then I will incorporate.
Where does
and the
it
hell
say
with
that you don't have to do the bylaw changes if you're incorporated?
Well, that's where I'm trying,
That's not
that's,
a rule.
well, that's why I'm trying, I'm a little lost in this whole notice thing, because what as I saw it, you're just asking the guys that are incorporated in the state to tell you the same stuff you're asking the guys not incorporated in the state to tell you.
Absolutely.
So I'm lost.
About
What's
why,
the-
about
what's the
why the
discussion?
notice
Why
had
do
changed.
we need-
Amy?
My
Well,
concern
that's
is,
different thing.
I'm sorry, my concern is, I like the fact that the different notices, we have made a choice to make all these notices and things go to the clerk's office, because I have comfort in knowing that it'll come to the assembly. I am leery of changing that to notice to the ombudsman, because what obligation does he have then to pass that on to the assembly? I mean, Daryl will, but I don't know what the next ombudsman would look, you know? So I don't see a problem with it going to the clerk's office. I understand her concerns, but, you know, the whole point in this is to cut out the middleman, to ensure that the assembly is communicating clearly and knows the status of their community councils. That's how I look at it. And I don't want to enter a third party into that realm, because I'm afraid that something would get lost.
And ultimately, it's up to this committee and the assembly as a whole to decide if that stays in. That's just, I'm just expressing Barb's, comment.
Right now, there's no requirement for them to do that.
So is that going into the draft, the final draft?
It's already in.
It's already in?
I'm comfortable with the draft as is.
You're comfortable with the draft? Okay.
Okay, so what, at FCC.
Yes, but the bylaw section I like. I'm just talking about this last point.
Whatever you
Yeah.
do.
Okay, so here at the FCC, as Dick, who's vice chair, and I, as staffer, we agreed here just now that we'll look at the final document you have, but we're going to have to create a crib sheet of responsibilities or new responsibilities for the CCs that this calls for, okay? So you're gonna be required to do new bylaws, you're gonna be required to send a notification of your legal status, so that they can clearly say, these are the 5 things that are required, that aren't required now, if there are things in there, but we believe there are. It would be great to have an assistance to do the second sheet, which is the proposed changes to what we have right now, like the assembly memorandum kind of thing that says that these are broad changes, and Koenig says 18, now it says 16, years old, and so forth, because that's really the summary sheet that they're all going to be asking Mark, Dick, what does this really change? What do I need to be aware of in this document? So having help with that portion would be great.
Well, I think that the portion about the AM is something that is, the assembly committee's AM. So in no way was that your responsibility to do.
Right.
Once we get
And
to that
so-
point, we'll develop it and say.
But I counsel against, I think it's really helpful, as many times as we've been through drafts of this, for you to make the crib sheet from this,
Right.
and not from an AM.
Right.
That is a summary of this. And
Right.
if you wanna send Daryl and I your draft bullets,
Of what we think it,
of
where we
what,
think.
of where you
Okay.
are, then that's extremely helpful, because all of a sudden, something could pop up, and we can say, oh geez, we're requiring them to do that, or no, we didn't, or what about this? And so that way, we have a cross-check,
Okay.
on that, from,
An
you know, from an
independent
independent voice. Do you agree?
Yeah, I don't think there's a lot of new requirements other than the registration, you know, the status one. It's incorporating some things into the bylaws requirements that are already in most bylaws, so. I
But
don't
not in
think-
all, I mean, he's talking about, we've talked about the voting.
Membership,
right, right,
eligibility
right.
to vote, and
That's what I'm saying.
and the
I
16
think
and
if-
17-year-olds,
but if you-
there's some.
If you look at it
Pretty high.
overall, there's a handful of
Okay, so
big changes.
we like to have that so that we can share with all the counselors, even the ones that aren't as active because they're very small, like Klutna, and others that are bigger but don't seem active at this time, so that they're aware as well. And I am planning to go to my mom's 85th birthday here for about 5 days in the end of next week. So again, pushing this back a little bit so we can have this ready to send to the
Right, I
councils
think
with
it's-
this would be great. Thank
Well,
you.
the last thing is, we're not in any time constraint. I mean, some of the ordinances, we write, they have to be out next week. Or like the mayor has to be processed in 2 weeks, that was 37. That hasn't worked out too well for us either. So let's take the time and get it done, right?
Thank you.
In terms of a list to the council, it seems to me that each council is gonna have something different.
Absolutely.
So I think they're having the document to look at is better, unless you want to do that analysis for each one of the councils, which seems kind of.
Well, this meeting's over with, so take care of yourselves.
All right.
Thank you, and good luck tonight. Thank you, and good luck tonight.